Thank you, Trim. We are good to go. I will start with the board. Dr.
Blanton. If you call Dr. Blanton, I'm here. Sorry, there was some feedback and I couldn't hear very well.
Yes. It's okay. I heard that as well. Dr. Bullock?
Here.
Dr. Dempsey?
Present.
Dr. Fleming? Ms. Janeski? Dr. Graham? Dr. Houston? Dr. Locklear? Dr. Marr?
Here.
Dr. Miller?
Present.
Dr. Penfield?
Here.
Superintendent Truitt?
Here.
Ms. Floyd? Dr. Holland?
Here.
Dr. Weddington? Dr. Wood?
Here.
Dr. Smith?
Here, Mr. Smith.
Oh, I'm sorry. Mr. Patton?
Here.
We have quorum.
Hey, thank you. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome commission members, advisors, staff, on-site visitors, and online listeners to the October 14th, 2021 monthly meeting of the North Carolina Professional Educator Preparation and Standards Commission. This commission develops and recommends to the State Board of Education rules related to all aspects of educator preparation programs and licensure. My name is Patrick Miller, and I'm the chairman of the Professional Educator Preparation and Standards Commission. I now call this meeting to order. Our agenda and materials are available online through the DPI website, www.ncpublicschools.org, on the SBE meetings link. The meeting is also audio streamed through a link located at the bottom of the eBoard agenda. I will now read the ethics statement that is required of us. Commission members are reminded that it is our duty to avoid conflicts of interest and the appearance of conflicts of interest as we handle the work of this commission. Does any member of the commission know of any conflict of interest or any appearance of conflict with respect to any matters coming before us at this meeting? If so, please state them for the record. If during the course of the meeting you become aware of an actual or apparent conflict of interest, please bring the matter to the attention of the chair. It will then be your duty to abstain from participating in discussion on the matter and from voting on the matter. Commission members, you've had an opportunity to review the proposed agenda for today's meeting. Do I have a motion to approve the agenda for the October 14th, 2021 meeting?
So moved. It's Catherine.
Thank you. We have a motion. Do we have a second?
Second.
Thank you. We have a motion and a second to approve the agenda for today's meeting. Is there any further discussion? Hearing none, those in favor of approval, please say aye.
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 Aye. Are there any opposed? The agenda has been approved. Thank you. The minutes from our previous commission meeting on August 12th, 2021 have been prepared and made available to you. Do I have a motion to approve these minutes?
So moved, Van.
Thanks, Van. We have a motion. Do we have a second?
Second, Randy.
Thanks, Randy. We have a motion and a second to approve the minutes from the August 12th, 2021 meeting. Is there any further discussion? Hearing none, those in favor of approval, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? The motion carries. Thank you. Now, Doctors Kim Evans and Andrew Seiberg will present the Ncdpi and State Board of Education updates.
Good morning, everyone. The first update is the Pepsi annual report for 2020-2021. This went up for action in September or in October for the State Board and was unanimously approved by the State Board. The only update that I did add to the report is completing all of the descriptions for the August meetings, because that was not possible when it was first submitted to Pepsi and then to the state board. So the completed Pepsi annual report for this past year is on the agenda. So if you're interested in seeing the complete report, please feel free to see it on the agenda. And now Dr. Seiberg will provide 2 additional updates.
Thanks, Kim. Good morning, everybody. The first one is on the foundations of reading. Pearson, the company that manages and is the vendor for foundations of reading, has updated its test to include elements associated with science of reading. And so last month we brought that to the board as a possible alternative, so that EPPs can now take either the original Foundations of Reading 090 or the new Foundations of Reading 190. And we brought that because we were aware that Pearson's web portal could potentially be making that confusing for candidates trying to sign up for just one of those 2. As well as the various stakeholders across the state, all in alignment that science of reading should be included in the training of educators going forward. It also helps alleviate some of the out-of-state folks coming into the state having taken this updated test. So ultimately this month, the board voted to allow for that to be in place. So now both the old test 090 and the new test 190 are going to be acceptable in North Carolina, effective backdated August 23rd, 2021. And that date is backdated because that's the point at which the Pearson website had both of those tests on it. So that's why we have it there. The intent here is to allow 2 years for these to be in place for EPPs to adjust their curriculum to include science of reading in their programs. And in the meantime, Pepsi's working with a literacy task force to review all the viable testing options that include science of reading as a more permanent replacement to this current situation of Foundations of Reading. So the new test, the new Foundations of Reading test, is certainly one of those candidates, but there's a stakeholder group that's ultimately going to come to Pepsi. Kim and I have been working on that behind the scenes with a committee group. We should be getting that to you in maybe a month or 2 to sort of set up what the permanent replacement for the old Foundations of Reading is going to be in the future. So that's the first item that I wanted to talk about. The second one is we brought a report to the board that was monitoring EPP performance and recommendations. Session Law 2017-189, that's the old 599, requires that the State Board of Education provide to the Joint Legislative Education Oversight Committee an annual report on the monitoring of the quality of the EPP performance reports in terms of when we collected the data for those performance reports. Were there any statistical anomalies? How about the data availability? Are there programs that are not providing data in a way that would be helpful to us to be able to report, and any other issues, that kind of thing. So that report came to the board this month. In general, we found that we were able to meet all the obligations of the Educator Preparation Program reporting, and those are all laid out in 115C-269.35 under the accountability of Educator Preparation Programs, that whole section. So we were able to collect all that data. And to this point in the development of those reports, there are no statistical anomalies in terms of, we didn't find any anomalies in either the collection or the development process for 2021. We did have, similar to the previous reporting year, 2019 and 2020, there were some disruptions in the development of and the reporting of accountability measures due to the COVID-19 interruptions. So of the accountability measures outlined, essentially they require right now NESIS, EVOS, and a student recent graduate survey. And of those three measures outlined, we have in our possession the satisfaction survey and the NESIS data for 2021. EVOS data are not yet available, but we are expecting them. And the point at which we get those data, we'll be able to quickly plug them into the performance reports and update the dashboard at that time. And ultimately, we're going to have to think about accommodations for the COVID interruption in terms of the accountability calculations going forward. And we'll be working on that next. Let's see here. Once those data are and those reports are given to the State Board of Education, then they're publicly available on the Ncdpi website. The other thing that this report asks for is any recommendations for, are there any things that we see in our collection process that we think the lawmakers might consider changing in the law to help the process be a little more nimble and so on and so forth. And annually we request the same thing, which is that these reports are due December 15th, and we're never able to meet the December 15th deadline, and that's because of the teacher effectiveness data, the EVOS data, that always shows up much later than we are able to process all of that and get it in front of the board and ultimately get it passed by December 15th. So we've put in that report, as we did the previous year. Please consider extending that to April 15th instead of December 15th. And they have not, I ask for that every year, and they basically don't change the law, and then I have to file for an exception every year. So that's the second portion of that report. And those were the two things that we presented to the board this month.
Any questions for Dr. Seiberg or Evans? Hearing none, we will move on. Thank you, Dr. Seiberg and Dr. Evans. At this time, Dr. Tomberlin will introduce Session Law 2021-48 and review Senate Bill 695, Part 1. Dr. Tomberlin.
Thank you, Chairman Miller. Good morning, Pepsi board members. I would like to discuss with you this morning two recent pieces of legislation. One is currently session law. The other is pending the governor's signature. And I'm going to start with Senate Bill 582, which is now session law 2021-48. And this is around adjunct instructors in K-12 courses. And so this piece of legislation is revising some current statute. We already had a vehicle for faculty members in community colleges to be able to serve as adjunct instructors. This clarifies the courses in which they are allowed to hold that adjunct instructor position. Originally, it was core subject courses. Now that's been expanded to fine and performing arts as well as foreign language. So this basically covers all courses K-12 with the exception of physical education and CTE. Now, this is largely an employment bill and would not be under the purview of Pepsi or the State Board of Education, except for the first line in this criteria for faculty members. And it reads that the State Board of Education shall develop minimum criteria of relevant education or employment experience for these individuals who will take on these adjunct instructor roles within our K-12 public schools. So it will be the work of Pepsi to make recommendations to the State Board of Education around those minimum requirements of education and employment to hold the adjunct position. Just for your awareness, the adjunct instructor position has been opened up to folks that we would largely refer to as residents. You can see here that if an individual holds a related bachelor's or graduate degree and is in a community college or educator prep program and completes courses concentrating in teacher preparation for at least one semester, that person will be eligible to teach high school level courses. Now, this is a distinction that they can only teach at the high school level in the core academic subjects, fine and performing arts, and foreign language. Again, at the high school level, this is excluding CTE and physical education, as we can see. This person would have the opportunity to be employed as an adjunct instructor. This does not ask us to develop minimum educational requirements because they are defined in the law. So for the purposes of this section, one semester of courses concentrating teacher preparation shall mean at least 9 credit hours taken in a semester in a program of study leading to a certificate, diploma, or associate degree in teacher preparation. So that's very clearly articulated there. I don't think that there's necessarily policy recommendations as far as who qualifies to hold this adjunct instructor position. Now, one thing that this board needs to contemplate, as you can see here, teachers are candidates enrolled in an ed prep course after one semester, if they have completed 9 semester hours, it would be allowable for them to take an adjunct position. And basically that's employed less than 20 hours a week. So they're going to be employed as part-time, non-benefits earning positions and working in the school districts. The implications I feel like this has, and Pepsi needs to make some consideration, especially from the EPP side, is what does this mean in terms of the intersection of adjunct instructorship and clinical internship? Can those two things be satisfied at the same time? What is the policy guidance for the field on if a ed prep program person or a residency person is engaged in this? What would that mean in terms of employment? It would be highly unusual for a traditional prep program person to be in this situation because they don't have bachelor's degrees generally. But I have to imagine that this may arise. And so I think one of the things Pepsi might want to think about is how that internship might impact any clinical internship or any clinical internship requirements for the candidate. We will be bringing this back to Pepsi with some policy recommendations after we've discussed this with our field-based stakeholders, that is Ncdpi and the EPPs and the Teacher Recruitment and Retention Task Force, which is made up of HR directors and superintendents from across the state. And I'm happy to take any questions anybody might have on this, but we will be seeing this again in the near future.
Questions?
So this is Ann, I have a question. How is this different than residency?
So this would not, so residency, I don't see any kind of intersection with residency because those teachers by definition are employed full-time in a public school setting. So there would be no need for that person to be hired as an adjunct. Where there's a potential, there's potential intersection with this is it's unusual, but we have had situations where folks with a bachelor's degree, an existing bachelor's degree, elect to go back and do a ed prep program rather than become a resident. So they may enroll in your educator prep program and are seeking what we would consider traditional license, even though they already hold a bachelor's degree. It's fairly rare, but I think we need to think about if they did that and they were adjunct instructing for these fewer than 20 hours a week, what would the implications be in terms of things like clinical residency? So it's a small intersection, but I think it's one that happens in the field, and we just don't want to be in a situation, I think, where we're not clear about this board needs to decide whether the adjunct instructor work can qualify for completing the clinical internship requirements. Because
This is Randy. I'm wondering if I'm understanding right, this would apply to students who are potentially in our MAT programs.
yes.
And that's not that rare. These are sizable numbers of students in the pipeline.
That is correct. Your MAT programs would be affected by this. If they're not also residents at the time, if they're not employed at the time they're doing the MAT. So, and quite often they're not, because they are, they're basically doing a version of a traditional pathway. They're just doing it through an MAT program. So, right. So there are policy implications here that we need to address in what is largely, for the most part, this is an employment bill. So, a lot of this stuff is really for the districts to sort out if they do contract with these folks. But there are a couple elements here that need some policy direction in terms of establishing the minimum education and experience requirements for those faculty members, and then also looking at how the adjunct instructor might intersect with our current clinical internship requirements.
Tom, this is Ann again. I have a question about this 1 semester of courses concentrating in teacher preparation should mean at least 9 credit hours taken in a semester in a program leading to a certificate diploma or an associate's degree in teacher prep. So you're saying that if they take what has been, I'll use my words, considered introductory teacher prep AA courses and the AATP or that would be considered as part of a certificate? I mean, because they get an AA and they have introductory courses, and then how do they finish their licensure? Are there just an adjunct, meaning that if they take those 9 credits at the community college, this is just another pathway? This is a bit confusing to me, considering those are considered introductory courses.
Right. So that's a great question. And I'm not trying to be cheeky. I just want to be clear that I'm not saying anything. I'm just reading the law. The way I would read this is that a person in a community college that is seeking an AA degree in teacher preparation and took 9 credit hours in a semester would qualify to be an adjunct instructor. Now, I want to be very clear. The law goes on to state that, and you can see down below in B3, an adjunct instructor shall not be required to hold or apply for licensure as a teacher. So this is not a pathway to licensure. This is a pathway to employment. So these folks would, to my understanding, would not be paid on the teacher salary schedule necessarily. They would be funded the same way that school districts fund substitute teachers. This is a contract position, and so it's on the LEA to negotiate the value of that contract. But there's nothing in this that indicates that they're paid as a teacher, and so unless of course they have licensure. So I think I don't construe this as a pathway to licensure. I see this as the opportunity or the allowance to contract with an LEA, and everything else about the pursuit of licensure is governed by current policies and statutes.
Tom, this is Van, to follow up on Ann's question, up at the section A at the top, in order for an individual to be, in the underlying text, in order for an individual to even be considered to take on these adjunct responsibilities, they have to be enrolled in a teacher preparation program. That's the implication of the last three lines. Courses concentrating in teacher preparation shall meet the 9 credit hours in a program of study leading to a certificate, diploma, or associate degree in teacher preparation. So it can't be any 9 credit hours. It's got to be 9 credit hours in a defined program called some teacher preparation program. And although they may ultimately not finish the license, they have to be in a pathway toward a license. That's what that section means.
That I do not disagree with that statement.
Okay.
But Tom, this is Marcy. So to that point, we have had the ability to hire adjunct faculty. This is just an amendment to the law. So the rules that were in place before this will not change. We can still hire an individual. Sorry about that. For example, if there's someone at Wake Tech here in Raleigh who has a degree, doesn't hold a license, but is teaching at the community college, we could teach them, we could hire them as an adjunct faculty to teach one course at a high school right now if we chose to do that. That doesn't change, and that person's not pursuing a program or a license. They're just teaching a course for us as an adjunct faculty member. But if they're A1 in a teacher prep program, to Ann and Van's point, they would be pursuing a license going forward, correct?
That is correct.
Okay, so that doesn't change it.
I think the A is not different. I agree with that, except in where it clarifies the subject areas that in which the person can be employed. I think one of the things I'm pointing out, and it's not new, is to my knowledge, we don't have state board policy defining the minimum criteria of relevant education or employment experience. I think that is work that PEPC must undertake and make a recommendation to the State Board of Education of what are those for the faculty piece. But I recognize that's not new, Dr. Holland. That's existing statute. And you're right, it's A1 that kind of adds a wrinkle to this. And then you have a question in the chat, would the foreign language designation include ESL instruction? I think that would be part of the policy work for this group, is to define if we think that there's confusion or these areas of permitted instruction are open to interpretation, then it would be the role of this group to make recommendations of how we define those things for State Board of Education policy.
Tom, can I ask a clarifying question?
Sure.
So does A1 create a new class of part-time teachers? So does this mean, like, if I have a bachelor's degree and then I go and earn 9 credit hours in teacher preparation, I am forever eligible to be an adjunct instructor working 20 hours in perpetuity?
Regardless of your continuation of the licensure path, is that what you're asking?
Yes.
I would read it that way, yes.
So I think that's an important distinction then, particularly with IHEs and thinking about this idea of creating certificates and things of that nature, right? That the 9 credit hours then seems to be pretty important if we are in fact creating a class of part-time teachers.
This is Ann again. So I understand, Marcy. Hey, Marcy, I understand your example. And no, that's been going on for a long time, right? Like community college folks that come in and teach the concurrent enrollment classes at the high schools. So is this something that, just for my information, is this something that came from the field because we have other people that they want to hire that maybe have an English degree that want to work part-time, or where did this come from? I mean, what was the impetus that brought this forward?
I am unaware of the provenance of this.
So, Ann, this is Marcy, and I'm not aware of where this came from either. It's not been something that we've discussed in the field as an organization collectively. I find it interesting, though, that this is coming up now, given the work that the subcommittees are doing and looking at what the first level of available license will be in the new, what we're looking at going forward. To me, it almost harkens to that level and entry level of licensure a little. I mean, there are some parallels there to people that are in prep programs. So it may be a precursor to that. I don't know. But again, we've not discussed it collectively as an organization or a body of HR professionals.
Right. I don't believe this is also, I don't think this has also been discussed in the EPP circles as well. I just want to go back and clarify that I don't see the associate degree. I see it as an introductory to teacher prep, but it's not a license at the community college. So I just want to be clarified based on your comments. So like, it's not a license. It is courses that are count toward licensure if they transfer, but it is not a license in itself. So, all right, thanks for the information.
Yes, and Dr. Bullock, I think that is clearly articulated down below. This is not about licensure. I think the challenge that we're going to have moving forward is if these folks in A1 begin working on a part-time basis in the schools, then the question is, well, if they're good enough to work 20 hours a week, why can't we hire them to work full-time? And
I agree.
And I think that's, I mean, I think the policy needs to be very tight around this to articulate the board's position and PEPC's position on, you know, what are the limits and the parameters to this temporary employment or part-time employment, not necessarily temporary.
Tom, this may be a question for Patrick. Does PEPC have the capacity to either define or recommend what the 9 hours should be? There's a difference between the kinds of courses a student might take mid-program and late program as compared to introductory courses. It also gets back to Ann's point a second ago. Does PEPC have the ability to do that? Patrick?
I don't know the answer to that question, but I was thinking about that as I was listening to you all talk. I mean, are we talking, like you say, entry-level preparation or right before clinical experience prep class? I don't know. I don't know the answer to that. Tom, do you have an opinion?
Well, I can say that the state agency has been very hesitant to develop policy that kind of gets in the authority of EPPs or for community colleges for that matter. I don't think that DPI and or the State Board of Education kind of articulating specific courses that need to be a part of a certificate, diploma, or associate's degree is something we've ever done. But whether you're precluded from doing that or not, I think is a question for Ms. Schaefer if she's feeling like she might want to weigh in on this.
But Tom, just to follow that, I'm sorry to interrupt. The state does prescribe what a teacher is supposed to know and be able to do. And then EPPs build their programs around that, and this would seem to be parallel to that. If we're going to say these people can go into public schools and take on instructional responsibility, there's a set of minimum expectations about their ability to go in a classroom and do that. And that would be connected to those 9 credit hours.
This is Allison Schaefer, if you would like me to weigh in.
Yeah.
Please.
I think that what PEPC should do is, if you believe that recommendations should be made, you should discuss it, and make those recommendations to the state board. I believe the state board could impose some sort of general requirements, such as, you know, these certain courses, beginning courses need to be taken, or basic courses, or something like that. But they would want to look at whatever Pepsi recommended. If you think that something specific needs to be in there, I think that would be, I think it would be well received coming from this group to the state board. In other words, I don't know if it's required that you define what those courses need to be in those 9 hours, but if you think it's important to do that, the state board would want to. Does that help?
Thank you.
Yes. So we may not require it, but we could certainly strongly encourage.
Yes,
So-
the state board could consider what to put in the policy, but it would want your recommendation.
So I have a couple comments around that. Thank you, Allison. This is Ann again. So Marcy, the people that you hire from the community college typically have a master's degree. Is that correct?
I can't say that it's 100% there. There might be some who have a bachelor's and have experience. I don't know. I mean, it's not a widely used tool here in Wake. I imagine it's more so used in some of the smaller districts.
Okay.
In other regions.
All right. So, So I would suggest that we think about, is this someone could do this forever, right? Like, I'm sure this is meant to address the attempt of trying to fill in gaps around vacancies. So I think we might want to be proactive and think about, do we want to recommend something around if they start like this and then they want to be hired, how does this correlate into a residency program for someone? Because if you're going to do this, if somebody's going to do this, then, and they're doing a pretty good job because they just have some natural ability and have had some coursework, then they're probably at some point going to want to be a full-time teacher. So that's just my thought around what we might need to think about. Because I hate for somebody that wants to be a teacher and starts by doing this to get stuck, right? And then not have a pathway forward to get their full license.
This is Randy. I'd like to follow up on Ann's comment, and thank you for that. I really agree, and I'm wondering if this raises also equity issues. When this could become a pathway of sorts to become a teacher, even though not a full-time teacher. And when we look at the distribution of individuals who enter the pathway, that particular pathway, it could disproportionately advantage certain groups of individuals. So I just think it's important to keep on our radar.
So one thing I do want to point out for everyone and this is again an employment issue, but I think it's important for us to understand of how these folks could be employed. They can be employed one of two ways: 20 hours per week, which essentially would be at the high school level, let's say for these adjunct instructors, that's 2 courses, teaching 2 courses over the course of the entire year. Alternatively, the LEA could hire this person on a full-time basis, but for less than 6 full consecutive months of employment. So in that case, generally when we talk about contractors, you would have to take a month break, or within the school year, they could not teach more than 6 full consecutive months, because that would put them into a different, that would put them into a leave earning. But this is a concern of, would we get in a situation where, because of staffing issues, schools have to hire these folks on a full-time basis, but then they can only do for 6 months, and then they have to fill the remainder of the school year with a long-term substitute, because the person would be precluded from teaching the rest of those courses. I do think it's in our interest to ensure that these folks, or provide ample opportunity for these folks who are entering teaching in this way to get licensed, and help them move through that process. To Dr. Penfield's point of equity concerns, we don't want people getting kind of frozen out of a licensure opportunity because they are having to work at least part-time, and they can't get through the rest of the licensure process.
Tom, this is Wesley. Just to make sure I have clarity on this, the only difference from this and our current statute is that this applies to foreign language and performing arts versus our current statute that just applies to core subjects. Is that correct?
That is correct. Previously, they had to be in core subjects, so math, reading, social studies, or science. Now that has been expanded to the fine and performing arts and foreign language. And then the adjunct instructor with teacher preparation, same subject areas, but they are limited to high school instruction.
So does this current session law will it overwrite our current statute in place?
Yes, it amends the statute, yes.
Other questions or comments? All right, Dr. Tomlin, you ready to move to Senate Bill 695?
Sure. So for this, this is Senate Bill 695, and this is a little unusual in that I have to repeat that this has not yet been formally, well, this hasn't been signed by the governor, or has not been, it has not completed the process of becoming law at this time. However, we wanted to discuss this with folks because this particular piece, part one here, was recommended to the legislators by DPI in recognition of some issues we were having with principal licensure. It passed the House and the Senate unanimously, and we fully expect the governor to sign this into law, or at least allow it to become law. And so we wanted to make sure we took this opportunity to clarify what this law is providing in terms of principal licensure exemptions. So as many of you know, there has been recent discovery that the State Board of Education's policies concerning principal licensure are not compliant with existing law. And that is around some very specific areas. The first of which is an examination required for licensure. We have not required that since around 2008. And so, but the statute still indicates a requirement for a principal to take a licensure exam as part of, as one of the requirements for holding the license. The second is the year-long internship. That has not been defined in board policy, and there's quite a bit of variation across the state as to whether a internship occurs as part of the preparation and ultimately licensing, or whether it's a certain number of months, or whether it's a full 10 months like we're seeing with our TP3 and principal fellows programs. And then the third is the law is very specific that a prerequisite for holding a principal license is classroom teaching experience. And classroom teaching experience is separate from educator or teacher experience, in that classroom piece clearly puts this into the classroom setting. So that would be to the exclusion of instructional support personnel would not be required, would not be eligible to hold a principal license under the terms of the law. Of course, many of you know that we do license school counselors and other instructional support folks as principals that do not have any classroom teaching experience. And so we found that this was out of compliance. And then finally, the requirement that the individual hold a master's degree in education administration, that is in statute as a requirement, and that of course impacts a lot of our licensure only pathways to the principal license. Many of you have these licensure only programs where you admit folks who have some kind of existing master's degree, and instead of issuing an MSA, you issue some kind of certificate of completion of principal preparation, and that has yielded a license. And then the last thing is related, I think, to the classroom teaching experience. So the candidate for principal licensure must hold a license in a classroom teaching area, and they must have met what we call the second level of differentiation, which we interpret to be conversion to a continuing professional license. And there are many, many sitting principals out there and principal applicants who have not cleared the teaching license, but have let the license, the teaching license, go and sought the administrative license, and according to law, that is not allowable. So this bill proposes to waive those requirements listed there for. Now, this one is, this waives the requirements for those administrators who were licensed from 2010, the 2010-11 school year, all the way up to the 2021 school year. So everybody licensed from July 1st, 2010, all the way to June 30th, 2021 would be covered by this waiver. This waiver allows them their license to be deemed valid, and it covers any future renewals of their license. So in effect, they're grandfathered in. There are no additional requirements for those folks. We do not have to impose any additional requirements on anybody who was issued a license during that time period. Then Section 1B moves on to waiving those requirements for anyone who is applying after July 1st, 2021. And that waives the same requirements as we saw in the previous section. The exam, the year-long internship, the classroom teaching experience, the requirement to hold a master's in education, and the second level of differentiation, or the acquiring a CPL in the teaching area. What is different here that that Pepsi will need to deal with is in Section 1A, this waiver applies to everybody in that time period and future renewals. That language of future renewals is absent from 1B. So this whole waiver is predicated on the assumption that Pepsi and the State Board of Education will make recommendations to the legislature for what principal licensure will look like moving forward. And when I say moving forward, the date that we must keep in mind is in Section 1.c, August 31st, 2022. So this idea of future renewals is not the main concern right now. The main concern is making sure we can continue to move folks through the principal licensure process. But I do want to recognize that it will be the work of Pepsi, and it is short order work to create legislative recommendations for legislative changes to the principal preparation and the principal licensing statutes so that these folks are covered. And whatever we come up with, those folks who are issued a license after July 1st, 2021 will be held to those new requirements because they are not waived from future renewals. That is, when they go to renew those licenses, they will need to meet the requirements for holding that license as we have updated them after August 31st, 2022.
May I add one thing? One of the things that could happen is if new legislation allows.
I feel like I'm hearing a question, but I couldn't hear.
Tom, this is Allison.
Oh, hi.
Hi. So one of the things that could happen is that those that are covered in 1B could also be grandfathered in if that were enacted in new legislation. So that's an option for this group to consider.
Allison, you sound like you're in a tunnel.
Okay. I don't know what to do. I'm out.
Can you put your question in the chat, please?
So I will try to reiterate what I think I heard. Ms. Schaefer is recognizing that these folks are not covered, but the recommendation for changes to the legislation could in fact waive those requirements or not hold those folks in the 2021 who were licensed after 2021 and before August 31st, 2020. It could waive those renewal requirements for them. So that's something that Pepsi and the State Board of Education could recommend to the legislature to offer that continued grandfathering in for those folks. I think is what Allison said, but I'll hold and see if she confirms that.
Other questions or comments for Dr. Tomberlin? I see.
Dr. Miller, I think the last thing I wanted to say on this is just to clarify what the deadline is, and that is August 31st, 2022. And that waiver would apply to anyone who completed at least one course as part of a master's degree program or certificate program for school administrators. So, folks who are looking to get their candidates, and even those who are enrolling in the upcoming school year in an MSA program, they would need to have completed a course towards the master's degree in administration by August 31st, 2022 to be eligible for this waiver.
All right. Last call for folks. Go ahead.
Yeah, Chairman Miller, I just want a clarifying question. Tom, thanks for this. I just want to make sure I'm understanding correctly. This legislation is addressing the waiver of requirements at the current time and up to those who would be enrolled in 2022. What the requirements will actually become and what waiving of those requirements will become, let's say, for future students who aren't yet enrolled, that has yet to be fully codified. Am I understanding that correctly?
That is correct. So it is my understanding that it is the expectation of the General Assembly in providing this waiver that they would be looking for recommendations ultimately from the State Board of Education and through Pepsi and other processes, that they would receive recommendations for how the statute should change regarding principal licensure moving forward.
Thanks, John.
Tom, this is Marcy. Clarifying question.
Sure.
For individuals who are in the 1A category that this applies to for future renewals, if they currently hold a teaching area but haven't met the testing requirements to convert that, you're saying that now they don't have to?
Right. If they are covered under 1A, the way I would read this is that there is no requirement to have classroom teaching experience, as we're defining it, as you know, as separate and apart from instructional support. And then 5, the second level of differentiation required by GS 115C 284D1. So that is correct. Now, I think what you're getting at is process within the agency that our current system and our current processes and licensure don't allow one to hold a principal license in isolation. That is, it's always predicated on an underlying teaching license or instructional support license. This law has impact for that process as well. We would have to revisit that and make accommodations for that under this law.
Okay. We have lots of examples in our district of people that are going to be impacted by this. I'm just trying to wrap my head around it and what also message that may convey to classroom teachers who remain classroom teachers who are being held to a standard that now individuals who have pursued an administrative degree will not be held to that same standard and what that might create culturally. Just a comment, concern.
Yeah, I'm with you. I mean, I mean, this is the thing that this group is really going to have to grapple with. We do have administrators I think the instructional support licensing is a separate issue, but I think the recognition that we do have administrators that never cleared their teaching license or spent fewer than 3 years in the classroom being administrators, I think that has impact on the field beyond kind of the policy implications. It has I recognizing the as you put it, the cultural situation it's creating.
Other questions or comments? Hearing none, thank you, Dr. Tomlin, for those updates. At this time, we'll ask the co-chairs of the subcommittees to provide an update on their work. And unfortunately, Dr. Dempsey had to sign off to attend a Board of Trustees meeting down at UNC Wilmington. And Dr. Weddington is covering for a sick professor teaching that class. So we will not have an update on prep and entry today. So we'll move on to licensure with Dr. Bullock and Dr. Wood.
Morning, everyone. Haven't spoken to Ann this morning, so I'm not sure. We discussed who's going to speak, but we've made a lot of progress this past meeting. Ann will be leading our next meeting, and I think we'll be able to put a beginning draft of recommendations. We've looked at various measures that could be used as alternatives to licensure exam. And our plan next is to formulate some more formal recommendations to DPI on how to use those measures and what the committee's recommendations would be for DPI to consider as we formulate that draft together. So we'll be ranking those of which ones we feel will be most appropriate to use to least appropriate, with also considerations for DPI to use. And do you have any other comments you'd like to add to that?
That was perfect, Wesley. Thank you.
Okay.
All right, great. Any questions for Dr. Wood on that? Hearing none, we'll move to advancement and development. Dr. Marr.
Good morning. So advancement and development met back on September 29th, and we were really focused at this time on the kind of right end of the spectrum there in the teacher leader category, and starting to build out some of the expectations for the licenses at that end. And we have another meeting coming up in the next couple of weeks, and we'll continue to work on on defining those competencies.
Great. Any questions for Dr. Moore? Hearing none, we'll move to budget and compensation. Dr. Graham.
Hey, good morning, everyone. We met very recently, and we've been wrestling with the minimum salary levels for each license level. We've made a great deal of progress, thanks to the DPI staff for creating an electronic model that allowed us to input data and get a good feel for what an overall estimate would be in terms of a total amount that we would be requesting, but we're still working through those salary levels. We thought we were at a point where we would be able to share with you all this morning some of the specifics there, but in our last meeting we got hung up just a little bit, so we're hoping in our next meeting we can give you some more specifics. We've also spent a lot of time understanding the apprenticeship model and the impact of what that may look like for the state. So we're still working through the details there, but two great presentations in our last meeting on that apprenticeship model. And the next meeting will kind of solidify these minimum salary levels, and we'll talk a great deal about the professional development accounts. We're collecting data from several school districts to get a good feel for what the districts are spending on teachers relative to professional development. So we want to use a data-informed approach there, and then we'll turn our attention to the whole harmless provision. So we've made a lot of progress in a short period of time, but we have a lot of progress yet to make.
Great. Thank you, Dr. Graham. Any questions or comments? Hearing none, certainly like to thank the co-chairs for continuing to lead this subcommittee work as we work to reform the licensure process here in North Carolina. One other thing, we do have some new members to Pep-C, and I'd like to welcome them today. Ms. Eugenia Floyd, the 2021 NC Teacher of the Year, and unfortunately she was not able to join the call this morning. We have also Mr. Craig Smith. He's the principal at Lake Norman Charter School. Also have Mr. Eric Patton. He's a science teacher at Chatham Central High School and Chatham County Schools. And we also have Dr. Marcy Holland, the Senior Director for HR with Wake County Public Schools. I'd like to formally welcome you all to Pep-C. With that, I would like to thank the commission members, advisors, and staff for your preparation for today's discussions. Would like to remind commission members that our next Pep-C meeting is November 18th, beginning at 9 a.m. We've now completed our meeting, and unless there's additional business, I would ask for a motion to adjourn.
Patrick, this is Ann. There's something I want to say before we close out. So I just want to make this comment that I watched the introduction to the letters training video this week. It was brought to my attention, and I was very disappointed in the way EPPs were discussed in that introductory training. So I wanted to know if anybody from DPI or would like to respond to the way EPPs are characterized in that introductory video. Because if we're going to be partners, I think we need to be partners. And that's not the way EPPs were portrayed when I noticed that video. I don't know if everybody's watched it, and I don't know if my EPP partners have watched it, but I would suggest that you do, because it was very disheartening to me.
Dr. Bullock, are you talking about the introduction by the Voyager-Sopris organization's letters videos?
Yes. Did you hear me? Yes.
And for those of us who have not seen it, would you mind providing a little more context based on your interpretation of what you saw?
Yes, so my interpretation is that around minute 5, they put up an NCTQ thing that says that, you know, based on NCTQ survey data, that less than 50% of EPPs prepare candidates to teach the science of reading. But in North Carolina, I mean, they don't say this. So what they basically say is, in my interpretation, Anthony, is we're not preparing teachers to teach the science of reading. And in North Carolina, we use the Foundations of Reading test, which correlates with science of reading, and not that, and EPPs, private and public, have worked very hard that to incorporate the science of reading and have done so quite well and are continuing to do so, and their partnerships to do so. But it gives the impression that EPPs aren't preparing teachers to teach reading. And they say it in a way that's very like, we're doing this training because you haven't gotten what you needed in an EPP. And it just really struck me as bad. So I suggest people watch it, because I think that if we're going to use and have a partnership, and we've got lots of partnerships going around, and EPPs are very supportive of the science of reading. And if you look at the Foundation of Reading pass rates in North Carolina for traditionally prepared EPP candidates, overall, they're extremely good.
Dr. Bullock, I appreciate your comments, and I have not seen the introduction. But what I would say is that certainly it's disappointing to hear that the tone of the introduction you're describing is what it is. But as far as the actual facts that you're sharing, I know first of all, the current Foundations of Reading exam is not aligned to the science of reading. And that is why there is a new exam forthcoming that will be better aligned to the science of reading. Second of all, I personally, in 2017, went to visited the majority of our UNC system colleges of education, not our private and independents. And even at our institutions where deans were themselves very strong proponents of the science of reading, the report that then President Spellings commissioned, she actually got a Belk Foundation grant to do this work. What that report revealed from 3 outside consultants is that even at EPPs in the UNC system, where leadership was committed to the science of reading, that not all students were attending courses where professors were teaching the science of reading. I will also say that our data speaks for itself. 67% of 8th graders in North Carolina pre-pandemic are not proficient in reading. And when we disaggregate that, we find that 23% of Hispanic students and 14% of African American students are proficient in reading. And that's average in the US. So this is not a North Carolina issue, this is a national issue. And what I hear continuously when I go, I've been in hundreds of classrooms since January, and what I hear from principals and teachers alike, especially in districts that decided to engage in some kind of letters training or letters type training that is phonics based, is that their teachers, especially their beginning teachers, did not receive science of reading training in their EPP. Just yesterday, the day before, I was taken to a classroom, and I won't say the county, and was told this is one of our best teachers. She is absolutely just amazing. She's a lateral entry teacher, and just is phenomenal. I walked in, was watching her in small group instruction, and I, with my own eyes, saw her showing. They all had their reading books. They were all looking at the same picture, and she was demonstrating that the flower on the page was the word flower. It's 3Qing 100%.
So I am not contemplating that we need to do, anyone needs to do a better job. I'm not contemplating data on reading in North Carolina. What I am challenging is if we're going to be partners, throwing people, talking about EPPs in a negative way doesn't lead to partnership. That's what I'm talking about.
I do understand that. I will certainly look at the introduction, but and certainly no one at the department can ask letters to change their videos. I mean, we can certainly have the let them know this feedback, but I just would caution us in assuming on both sides that either all EPPs are doing this or all are not. It's not an either or. It's that we have a lot of EPPs that are doing, and you all know this better than anybody. A particular EPP program may be dedicated to teaching the science of reading, and that doesn't mean that all of your professors are.
Right, and I'm not arguing any of that. Okay. That is not the point of my comment. We are obviously at all our EPPs doing the best that we can and trying to be in partnership for these things. So I just think when people see that out of context, that it causes people to get upset about the partnerships with EPP in the state.
Okay,
Those are just my comments. They're not comments from anybody else.
I will certainly share that feedback with the Voyager Sopris team, who we are in weekly contact with. So that will be top of the agenda.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
You're welcome.
All right. Any other comments? Hearing none, I would entertain a motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn.
Oh, second for Marcy.
All right, thank you. We have a motion and a second to adjourn. All in favor of adjournment, please say aye.
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 Thank you, everyone. We are adjourned.